Yeah, we absolutely are. Think about that every time that you're allowing your kids all this game time. They are lab rats. It is a experiment that's working really well for the gaming companies, and it's throwing parents. They don't understand.
Welcome to the show called Let's Talk Homeschool, brought to you by Apologia Educational Ministries. This is the show where we talk about everything homeschooling: the who, what, when, where, why, and how. We want to affirm and encourage you in the decision to homeschool, challenge and inspire you to take it to new heights, and celebrate everything you get to experience along the way in this adventure of a lifetime. I'm your host, Davis Carman, and today we have a guest, Melanie Hempie. We want to remind you, our listening audience, that you can now watch us on YouTube, or you can continue to listen on your favorite podcast app. Today's show is titled Screen Strong. Okay, Melanie, let's talk homeschool.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Well, welcome to the show. I tell you what, one of the things I want to start for our audience is I want to read your bio, because it is going to give a good introduction to what we want to talk about today. And then I got some questions I want to ask you that are going to just walk us through a conversation that I think our audience is going to really resonate in a lot of ways. So Melanie Hempie is the founder of Screen Strong. It's a nonprofit organization, and she's also the author of Kids, Brains, and Screens. It's a course, a series for students and parents. She's dedicated to preventing and reversing childhood screen addictions by simplifying the scientific evidence that's out there and providing community for families around the globe. So her educational material is filled with everything she wished she had known before her oldest of 4 children suffered from a screen addiction. Screen Strong is created to what every family needs: education and community, to skip not all screen use, but the most toxic screen use, so that teens can reach their full potential. So here's some websites that we'll also remind you at the end, but screenstrongsolutions.com and screenstrong.org. And I love the tagline on your logo. It's reclaiming kids and reconnecting families. So that hopefully is a good intro to you all for what we want to talk about. So Melanie, why don't you start by giving some background as to how did Screen Strong get started and become this passion of yours?
You did such a great job with that intro that I think that sums it all up, right? But let me tell you how this organization got started, because with every organization, there is a founding story, right? So our story is about my oldest son. We have 4 children, and with your oldest, you're not always sure. You think you're sure, but you're not always sure about what you're doing. And so what happened with our oldest son, Adam, all through middle school and high school, he was a straight A student. He was just kind of a star student. We didn't have any trouble with him, but he started really diving into his video game world more than we cared to admit at the time. It was kind of embarrassing, actually, because he was dropping out of sports. He was dropping out of things at school. He was dropping out of his friend groups. And it was like, well, he was doing all that so he could play more video games. And so as we got through middle school, it was really tough. We started having some conflicts in our home. I became the game cop mom, which was a terrible job that I did not sign up for, but I was constantly managing Adam's game time, setting the kitchen timer and kind of arguing about all those things and limits, because I knew that it wasn't normal for a boy to be, hunched over a computer in the basement for hours on end. I thought he should be outside playing, and he should be riding his bike and all the things. And my friends all said, as we got into high school, because they were struggling, a few of them were struggling too, and they said, well, at least we know where they are and they're not getting in trouble. And I remember thinking again, that's a really low bar. They should maybe be getting in a little bit of trouble. They should be out knocking around town and whatnot. And, he didn't even want to get his driver's license, when he was old enough. And so he just gamed and gamed and gamed. But the thing that tripped me up was he had really good grades. And So that was my first warning sign that I missed. Just because your child is intelligent and has good grades and maybe a good IQ doesn't mean that they are mature enough to handle what's happening on their screens and their time around all that. And so we were so excited for him to go to college because we knew that at that point he would grow out of this silly game habit. And we were having so much conflict in our home at that point, where quite honestly, I will just admit that we were really happy for him to go to college because we wanted the conflict out of our home. Because remember, we have 3 other kids at home, and there was a lot of issues around his gaming and him not engaging with the family and actually being kind of mean to some of the younger kids, because as I learned later, gamers get very mean. When they get immersed in their games, they can punch the wall or hit their sibling or whatever. I mean, they're in a whole nother world. And so it was just causing a lot of problems. So he went to college. After that first year, we went to pick him up. And, the dorm room seemed really weird to me when I walked in. It was like untouched from where we'd left him at Christmas. It was so strange. So he packed his things up, and the first thing I noticed, Davis, was that he didn't have anybody to say goodbye to, right, in the dorm. And I thought, okay, this is kind of weird. Like, you should have friends. And he had no friends. So he got in the car, and he looked terrible. He was very exhausted looking. He had not bathed, I think, in quite a few days. He was very depressed. And I asked that question that parents dread asking, and with my nursing background, I knew enough to know there was something wrong. And I asked him if he was on drugs. And he said, no. He said, no, Mom, that game did something to me, and I've been in bed for a week, and I have not finished my classes. And at that point, I knew that we were dealing with something very different than what I thought. And so the whole way home, I was getting an earful of his life over the last 6 months and the previous 6 months. And it was so sad, and I was so sad for him. But then at the same time, there was this relief that I felt like, oh my gosh, we finally figured out what is happening. You are actually like addicted to this game, but was it possible to be addicted to an activity? And that's what I was struggling with, because in nursing school, I never really learned about that. We learned a lot about addictions, but not so much about these process addictions. And so, but he had all the signs. He was hiding it. He was lying about it. It basically replaced his school activities, and he did drop out of class. And it was so sad because he was in the engineering department. He was very smart. He went into college with 7 AP classes. I mean, he was ahead of the game there. So we got home, and he continued downward the spiral there, the downward spiral. It was very hard for me. I started doing a lot of research. I started traveling. I started over that next year-long period, I dove in and figured out what gaming addiction was and what a screen addiction is. So I really learned a lot about that. And it is like gambling, right? Like gambling or a sex addiction or anything that is a high dopamine producing activity. Your brain it doesn't matter what the activity is. It's the dopamine that's being released. I learned a lot about how with the young brain, it does so much more damage than with, an older brain that's already been formed. Addiction takes a very different form. And so we know that 90% of all addictions start in the teenage years. And this is very similar to any other addiction. I didn't know what to do with Adam. I knew that he wasn't going to thrive on my couch at home, and he had already announced that he wasn't going back to school. So I called the military, that's what every good mom does when she doesn't know what to do with a 19-year-old. And it is really sad, Davis, because you raise your children and you pour into them all the things, especially with homeschool families. They pour so much, and there's so much sacrifice. And you do need your kids to launch. That is a very important thing. Young parents think, okay, I never want them to leave home, and I'm telling you right now that you will want them to leave home. That's really important. And Adam wasn't going to leave home, so I called the military. The recruiter came over and recruited him, and I remember very distinctly when he came to my door, I said, my son loves to play Call of Duty, so please go recruit him. And he said, yes, ma'am. And he did. And Adam, we're so proud of him. He went into the military for 5 years and served. And I think that was a real turning point for him. He had 14 weeks initially of a detox. And what I know now and learned soon after his departure was that was exactly what he needed. He needed a long period of time off his game so his brain could reset the dopamine levels. So he came back. He did finish school. A lot of people ask me, yes, he finished school. And he actually just finished law school. He graduated fourth in his class. We're very proud of him. He is a spokesperson now for Screen Strong, and he explains to families what happens. And he tells me, Mom, you can share any part of my story at all to any audience, because I just really want parents and kids to understand how dangerous this addiction is. And when Adam was in the Army over that 5-year period, I started doing things very differently for my younger kids. And as you can only imagine, once you get burned with this and kind of have your defining moment, you change the way you do things because you don't want to keep having the same result with your other kids. And so my daughter was in middle school at the time, and she wanted that smartphone just like any other, middle school girl. And I just thought, you know what, we kind of messed up this first try. We're not going to do the same thing with you. And I thought maybe around high school would be a good time for her to get a phone. So I asked some of my older mom friends who had high school girls, and I said, tell me how that worked. And they said, oh, well, yeah, they have to have a smartphone, they have to have social media. But here's the card. They handed me a card of a doctor. They said, when Melissa gets on social media, she's going to need to be on medication. All our girls are on anti-anxiety medication because they have all this social media anxiety and depression. And I remember at that point knowing enough about screen addiction that I thought, are you kidding me? I am not going to give my daughter something that I have to give her medication for. And that may sound like an exaggeration, but it's really pretty true today, even still. A lot of kids are on medication because of the anxiety and, of course, the mental health issues. So I told Melissa that she would be just fine with a flip phone, and she was. So she went all the way through high school with a flip phone. She was fine. She actually had an athletic scholarship at a D1 university because she spent all her time in the gym and doing her sport. And so that worked out really well. And so then by the time the younger two boys, they didn't have a chance, right?
Did flip phones exist for your younger two?
Oh, sure. Yeah, they were a little harder to find, but yes. And so they're coming back. They're making a resurgence, these flip phones. But so we had a game-free home, and we had a porn-free home. And we made this very clear to the younger kids. And so the boys grew up without video games. Now, this doesn't mean they were in a bubble somewhere, right? They know about video games, and some of their friends had them. And when we would go to the dentist, unfortunately, the dentist had video games there. I mean, so it was fine, but that wasn't their go-to activity in our house. And I learned from Adam what the warning signs were and all the things, in order to keep my younger kids kind of safe. And so as a result of all of my experience from my medical background and then from all my work in the community, because I started having people ask me to come talk to their school and talk to their church about what happened in our life and the signs and symptoms of screen addiction, how to prevent it, and then how to reverse it. So that is how Screen Strong got started. That is your long answer to how it got started. So it comes with a lot of experience on my end.
Well, it definitely sounds like long and personal experience. And so a couple questions here. So I want to make sure our audience knows that you actually spoke at a homeschool conference in Texas recently. So this is not an issue that is for just one certain group of families. Homeschool families, private school families, public school families are all dealing with this in some way, shape, or form. But let's start with some of the early warning signs, because like you say, you saw some things that were concerning. Then you had like this wake-up call, but how would you summarize some of the initial warning signs for parents so that they don't have to go too far down the path before they have a come to Jesus meeting and are in emergency mode? So how would you summarize the things to really pay attention to and get the radar up for parents?
So the first thing is that you have a gut feeling that something's not right. Okay, that is the very first warning sign that no parent should ever, ignore. You've got to, I'm seriously, I think in homeschool families, and I do have some ideas around what homeschool families struggle with even more, maybe in some respects. But I think that you've got to really pay attention to the warning signs and not brush it off as, oh, I'm just being an overprotective mother, or, that's kind of what I thought, and that's the first thing. The second thing is it's the only thing that's putting them in a good mood, right? That it becomes the their activity of choice, where they would rather do that than go outside and play. They'd rather do that than go ride their bike. They'd rather do that than hang out with you or help you make dinner or whatever. That becomes their number one thing. In fact, if they can't list 3 things that they like more than video games and social media, then you're in trouble. That is a warning sign. Screens should not be in that top list of the favorite things. I mean, the screen should be a tool, not a toy. It should not be the main source of their entertainment. The other thing is that they're very unhappy when you unplug their screen. So this is the classic warning sign where, with any addiction, the withdrawal. It is a very real withdrawal, and that dopamine crashes because their dopamine is really high when they're playing their game or on their phone, and then you take it away, and you literally see grown 15-year-old boys having meltdowns like toddlers in the kitchen floor. Like it's, parents have called me to say, are they having a seizure? I'm like, well, it might as well be a seizure. It looks like a seizure. The other warning sign is that use is increasing over time. So they were maybe just playing a few hours, and now they're playing, 10 hours a week. It's increasing. Another warning sign is they're sneaking around and lying about their use. They're hacking passwords. They're getting into your router, they're going around your parental controls in all the ways, but they're sneaking and they're lying, and they're not being truthful about what they're playing, how long they're playing, who they're playing with. And most kids don't want to admit any of this to their parents because kids don't want to upset their parents and disappoint them, so they tend to lie. And we, as a culture, people lie about their addictions. When something is being misused, we tend to lie about it. The final thing, there's more, but the final thing I want to talk about just now is this detachment problem, and how games and social media and phones really interfere with family time. And what I believe, after almost 10 years in this space of working boots on the ground in the weeds with parents on this, I really believe that our entire culture is suffering from an attachment disorder. Our kids are becoming very detached from their family. And again, if you're a homeschool family, especially, you have made, all kinds of sacrifices to really nurture that attachment and to, like I said, pour in to your kids. But what happens, you don't realize this is like the hole in the bucket, right? You don't understand why your bucket isn't getting filled. And it's because there is this kind of secret trap door that your kids are escaping. And what happens, Davis, is their allegiance or their alliance, goes with the virtual world. And Adam explains this very well. We have a Connect group and we have a Connect Plus, and in our Connect Plus we have a lot of footage from Adam talking about this, about how you as a gamer are living in a virtual world, and it's not the real world, and you don't like the real world anymore, and your family happens to be in the real world, and you kind of get a new family in your virtual world. You have new friends, you have new attachments there. And I really think that this is, you don't, let me put it this way, we don't have prisons that are filled with kids that were really attached to their parents, okay? So I'm just saying the attachment issue is huge. The gut feeling is probably, though, the number one thing.
Right. Yeah, parents got to trust their instincts. And one of the things I like to say when I am only touching on this subject in some of my workshops is that for kids today, their only outlet is, well, an outlet. They got to be plugged in somewhere, and when they're not plugged in, or if they have slow internet, it, like you say, it brings out these behaviors that we need to pay attention to and not just brush off. So that's some of the warning signs, but clearly a big part of this is the addictive nature of video games, of social media. So speak to that a little bit. What are some of the signs that there's an actual addiction going on, and why are video games and social media so addictive? You talked about dopamine, but I'm sure there's some extra details that would be handy for our listeners to understand about why this happens.
Right. So we just covered kind of the signs. So you're watching all these things, these warning signs and red flags happen, and parents usually don't act on that because, like me, they can't do, the math. They can't figure out why is a game, I could see if it was a drug, I could see if it was alcohol, I could see if it was something they were ingesting into their body, right? That would be more of a problem. But what they don't understand is that is exactly the same thing as a drug or alcohol or anything that you would ingest. And this is what was so eye-opening for me. And even 20 years ago, we didn't know as much about the teenage brain as we know now. In fact, years ago, scientists just used to think that teenage brains were just like adult brains. They were relatively the same size, and they just thought it was about the same. But what we know now is that there's an area of the brain in the middle of the brain called the limbic area, and that's the emotion center, and that's where the fight-flight mechanisms are all stimulated with the amygdala, and that's where the dopamine production, all that is in the limbic area. And the front of the brain is the frontal cortex, and that is the judgment center. And for children, and especially teenagers, that is not developed yet. That's why it takes about 25 years for that frontal cortex, the human brain, to be fully connected and developed. So we know that now. We know a lot more about that now than, of course, we used to know in the past. But the way the brain science works around this is, first of all, you're dealing with an underdeveloped brain, and there's nothing you can do. There's no amount of chores or memorization or anything you can do to make that brain more connected in that frontal cortex area. It takes time, and it's true across the board for every child. There's no child out there that has a more developed frontal cortex than others, and people can kind of argue with this, but the fact of the matter, it's biology. It takes time for this development to happen. So, it's just with wisdom. You aren't wise overnight. You can't force wisdom. You have to have experience in life, and then you become wise. So the science around it is, when a child is on a game or on social media, and these things are interchangeable, the science is the same, whether it's a game or social media, the dopamine production starts to happen because, it used to be there years ago with games like Pac-Man, but, if you remember with Pac-Man, you kind of get bored after 30 minutes. I mean, it's kind of repetitive, the same thing. So the gaming companies have made what they call persuasive design, and this is science around human behavior and how to keep kids, especially kids on games, but adults too, hooked to the screen. And so there's ways that the companies do this. We know so much more about this now, and they spend millions of dollars every year to hire these experts to come in to make sure their game is the most addictive, so your kids won't get off of it. In fact, they have play test labs where kids test the games, and if they even look away during a certain part of the game, they go in and fix that part of the game. They don't want your kid to even look away. And so what this persuasive design is, a mix of basically behavior design, where they put little rewards, right? So when you're on your phone, even in a video game, you get a reward, but you don't get it all the time. It's intermittent, and you don't know when the reward is coming. And there's a whole science around this, and it's the exact science that is found in slot machines. And you know how that goes. You know how hard it is to walk away from a slot machine when you win a quarter, and then you spend, $5 more, right, to win another quarter, but you still do it because it's just that little reward. So the thing with social media also is that the algorithms are set to be customized to you. So your algorithm looks different than mine. The computer knows, right? The computer knows Melanie likes these kind of rewards, and Davis likes these kind of rewards. And so we're going to serve her these, and we're going to serve him that. It's not a one size fits all. In the gaming world, they have it down to such a science. They make the kids feel like they're needed. There's a sense of belonging. It's an escape. It's a competition. It's just this perfect mix of what every boy is craving for. Because we say mostly boys really struggle more with gaming, but girls actually game as well. But the science is that it is centered around the dopamine. The dopamine levels get really high, and then your brain over time starts to calibrate. So now you're not happy unless your dopamine is really high. Now your brain is used to that, and everything is reset. So now going downstairs to have Christmas dinner with your family is lame because you're not going to get the dopamine that you're going to get in your game. And Adam says, there's nothing in real life that gives you that amount of dopamine. And what I want parents to understand is it is a chemical. This is a chemical addiction. Adam was chemically addicted to his game because of this dopamine. And when your child is on cocaine or drinking alcohol, getting drunk or whatever, it's the same dopamine. And this was a big aha moment for me. I didn't realize that. I thought that other chemicals or other things were, being ingested with these other addictions, but that's not true. It's the same dopamine. And so cocaine is like a dopamine inhibitor. And so it makes your brain produce more dopamine. You actually get high on your own dopamine with drugs. People don't understand that, right? But just that little bit of science is really important to understand, that our kids are getting high on their own dopamine.
This is fascinating on a couple of different levels, because like you say, you can't actually see the chemical ingested into the child like you would nicotine or a sugar. Yeah. And most parents kind of understand that the concept of a sugar high for a young kid. Yeah. And it's real, and it's not just a high, but it's an addictive thing. Having that sugar makes you want more. We can see all that, but this is definitely more under the table. It's invisible, and so it's hard to make that connection. So I'm really glad you're helping us make that connection, that this is literally, not just figuratively, a chemical addiction.
Yes.
Of the body that's going on. And you mentioned gambling, and I have 7 kids. My 2 oldest sons are in their 30s. My 2 youngest sons are in their early 20s. And I've had conversations with them just recently about the dangers of gambling, because there's this proliferation of ads for online gambling on your phone that, from my perspective, is targeted to their age group. And I've told them, boys, don't even start. It will be worse than anything you've ever experienced in terms of the addictive nature. And so, but I've given them the warning. Hopefully they'll heed that and not fall to the peer pressure of their friends who are going to be sucked into that vortex as well. So there's all these very real things that are addictive. And I tell you what, it was sobering to hear you say that the gaming companies program this in as a science of human behavior. That's unnerving and scary just to think about how it makes it sound like we're lab rats and they're having a game to give us rewards occasionally that are customized to you.
We absolutely are.
So
we absolutely are. Think about that every time that you're allowing your kids all this game time. They are lab rats. It is a experiment that's working really well for the gaming companies, and it's throwing parents. They don't understand this, and this is why it's so important to get this message out. And I'm not trying to fear monger people. I'm not trying to scare people. I'm just trying to educate you so you can understand that you've got to put all your emotions aside, and you have to start using logic around this. We have to understand the underbelly of what's happening and the foundational harms that are happening. Once you understand the brain science around addiction, and in our workshops that we do, we actually have a video of the MRIs of a child, before gaming, after gaming, and what happens to their brain when they take a detox and they take a break, and how so many more parts of their brain become very stimulated at that point. But I think that if parents can just take one thing home today, it is that it's not your kid's fault. They're not misbehaving, right? It's not like they're trying to disobey you or be ugly. That's not what it is. They are truly immersed in an addictive activity that they cannot get out of.
Right.
And this is why moderation doesn't work. There are a lot of people that try, and we have thousands of families and all of the different groups that we have, and their questions are always, well, balance and everything, Melanie, moderation and everything. And the answer is no. We really don't believe that. We don't balance drugs. We don't balance alcohol. We don't balance pornography. There's certain things in your family with your values that you don't balance. So those are the things that you need to look at in relation to screens. So that is hopefully a key that can just open up some good discussions, with your spouse tonight. We have parents actually.
Well, that's a great summary. And I was going to say, as we slowly wrap this up, you just gave some things that I will say the unique approach of looking at this that Screen Strong is taking. So how would you start wrapping this up for our audience to where they can leave with some practical things they can not just think about, but actually do? And I think you just made a good point for all our listening families there are some things not to be balanced on. You say, we're going to have zero tolerance on these things, and this is serious enough that there needs to be a more bold approach to things. So what's the approach that you recommend for folks?
So the approach is that you've got to go back to the education and the research. And so with Screen Strong, we believe in two things. There's education and there's community. And this is true for families as well as for your children. So one of the most requested things that we have had over the last 10 years is, how can I explain this to my kids, right? So we have a workbook now. We have a beautiful 300-page full-color graphic novel-looking style curriculum. And I'm just pulling out this page right here to show you how we're explaining this dopamine cycle to your child. I want every parent out there to start seeing themselves as a coach. And you need a new game plan. You need, you don't need to keep doing the same thing over and over. You both have to learn. But your job is to explain also to your kids why you're saying no and why this isn't the best thing for them. And what happens is there's just this freedom in your home, because again, with homeschool families, y'all are struggling with some things a little differently, than other families who maybe their kids go to school every day for 8 hours and they're not in front of their, Xbox all day long. And that can be a temptation, right? When you're with your kids all day. So you've got to have the reason for your why. You have to know that you are the coach. You've got to take that parent hat off for a while and put your coach's hat on and think, okay, what would we do if our team was losing, right? We're going to change some things up. We're going to go back to the basics. We're going to start doing, push-ups and sit-ups and learn how to hold the baseball bat again.
There you go.
And we're going to have a new game plan. And so if your kids are already immersed, if they're already completely, into all their games and their screens and whatever, you can take it away. You can say, hey, we're going to start over. We're going to get, this curriculum. We're going to start learning why this is hurting our brains and what we can do to grow healthier brains. And my passion is around giving parents the tools. We are not going to go do workshops necessarily to save all your kids, but we're going to help you save your kids. We're going to help you have the words, and we are not going to conform to the cultural standard out there. You have to be countercultural on this, and it's just like smoking, Davis. We are going to find out, as we at Screen Strong have already found out, that in a number of years, we're going to look back, and you are going to just see this shift in culture, and we are going to be devastated over what did we do to this generation of kids. They grew up on a digital drug, and now they're suffering from all these other addictions because one addiction leads to another addiction, and we've lost them. They don't know how to be moms and dads. They are all growing up with their pornography. They don't understand even how to be in a relationship. Friendships are the first thing to go when your kids are on screens. You think they're being social. They are not being social on a screen. And our kids' brains and screens, we explain to them why that's not working. So for families, I just want to encourage families to get educated, to come to our site. We have all the material. I've done all the hard work, simplifying everything and making it easy, for parents to understand. We have a Substack that we put something up every week on there. And then I want them to get into community. You have got to find a few families, even just one or two. It doesn't have to be 100. You just need to find one or two families that will join with you and say, you know what, we're going to delay and just skip social media and video games through adolescence. And that means through high school. Because if you look at the brain science, that's what that tells us to do. And that's what we look at Screen Strong. We're very evidence-based in our approach, which happens to be wonderful because the truth never changes, and
Right.
And it is the best way for our kids.
Well, why don't you go ahead and share some of the websites, your book title, and where people can find everything Screen Strong.
Right. So our organization website is screenstrong.org. And then with our book and the curriculum that we have, which, by the way, is an 8-week curriculum, it works very well in a homeschool as well as a regular school setting. This is on kidsbrainsandscreens.com. And there is a whole bunch of information there where you have sample lessons. You've got 24 lesson plans. We have a scope and sequence. We have everything for this. So that's kidsbrainsandscreens.com. And then we also have our Connect group in our website on screenstrong.org and the Connect Plus. We do have some Facebook stuff. We're trying to move our community over to the non-social media platform on our site. And then I do have a weekly podcast where I have a lot of guests. We have a lot of moms. The one last week, we had a teacher on. I think that one's about to break our download record because everybody wants to know, how do we handle this, in a school setting. So we have parents come on and talk about what's working for them. So those are our main offerings are education. I do have 3 other books on Amazon. You can find them on Amazon or on our website. One is about Adam's story, about what happened and will your gamer survive, college. And the other one is how to raise a teenager without a smartphone, which you can do. Let me encourage you. More and more people are doing this. And I just want to, tell one last thing that our kids are getting everything that they have on their phone is available on their laptop. So you're not doing a disservice for your kids. Like, they're going to be fine. They're going to actually know still more than they need to know just by having a laptop. But, it's about access, Davis. It's about access. If you don't want to eat donuts, then don't buy a dozen donuts and put them on your kitchen counter. And especially don't put them at your night table. This is where, this is the problem, is access. And so ScreenStrong is very clear on delaying phones, and we're not saying all phones, we're saying smartphones and internet access in your pocket, through adolescence, all the way through high school. And our kids did it, and we have lots and lots of kids that are doing it, and they're really thriving. I would recommend that you listen to some of Andrew and Evan's podcast on our channel. ScreenStrong Families is our podcast. If you want your kids to listen to some kids that have grown up with those mean parents who didn't give them video games, smartphones.
Well, I have to think they don't think you were actually mean. I'm sure that now that they are older, their frontal cortex has matured some. There's some understanding of how much tough love it took to save them from this addiction, to help them, and to stick with it, and to change things dramatically, change your game plan for your younger kids.
So they are so thankful. And they don't think we're mean at all.
Right.
Maybe for a minute they did in middle school. I don't know. Well, it doesn't matter.
Parenting is hard work. So this has been some fantastic information from a just data and research and evidence standpoint, but also from a practical standpoint and even on the personal level. So Melanie, thank you for sharing your story about Adam, and I'm glad to hear that he's sharing his story to help others.
Yes.
But as always, these great conversations have to come to a close at some time. So we're going to bring this one to a close. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for watching. We hope you'll join us next time. This is Let's Talk Homeschool, brought to you by Apologia Educational Ministries, and I've been your host, Davis Carman, with our guest, Melanie Hempie with ScreenStrong. Have a great day, and until next time, we are walking by faith and enjoying the homeschooling adventure of a lifetime.